Well, it was a few years ago, about 5 years ago, that Amy and I faced a pivotal decision. We had to name our first boy. And that was kind of a challenge. Girl names came easy to us, but there was a little bit more disagreement among us when we were trying to figure out what the perfect boy name would be. But on top of that, there was actually another challenge. And that challenge was I had a legacy name, a name that had been passed down to me from generations. And I suppose that everyone who has a legacy name, whether you're George the Fifth, Bob the Second, it's always kind of a challenge to know, am I going to pass that name down? I don't really want to name somebody after me, but maybe think about it as naming somebody after your grandfather or something like that. But for me, it was just a little bit different, and this may surprise you, but I actually go by my middle name. Whenever I remember in high school and in middle school, whenever the substitute teacher would do the roll, it was always a painful, cringe-inducing experience when they would read off my first name. I just would anticipate it. Every time a sub came in the classroom, I knew it was coming, and the kids would turn around and say, "What? Your name is Henry?" Ugh. Well, it wasn't. Henry actually is making a pretty solid comeback these days. But when I was a kid, it was like an old person's name. Strangely enough, John is kind of becoming an old person's name today, and I guess Henry's back in vogue. But I didn't hate the name. I didn't hate my dad's name, my grandfather's name. It's just that since I always used my middle name, went by my middle name, it just wasn't me. Well, if you're joining us for the first time, we kicked off a new series last week called Questions God Asks, looking deep and encountering God. And it turns out that God asks questions in some pretty remarkable ways throughout the Bible. He asks questions to invite, to probe, and to sometimes reveal. And last week we looked at the question, where are you at? Where are you at? In the early pages of Genesis. And we learned that that's not a shaming question, but it's actually one of those questions that draws a person close and draws a person in. Well, today we're going to go a little bit further with another surprising question. What is your name? What is your name? But it doesn't take a theologian to know that there might be actually a question behind that question, a deeper question than what seems to just be on the surface. Chances are what's really being asked, and we can even ponder this before we jump into our passage today, is this. Who are you really? Who are you really? That's an important question to ask ourselves. And chances are we actually subconsciously ask ourselves that question quite a bit. Maybe it stirred in your mind in middle school when somebody gave you a name, like the quiet one, or the problem child, or overachiever, something like that. Or maybe it came from no specific name at all, but the feeling of being defined by something that you didn't choose in your life, something that your parents expected, as something that your friends assumed, or maybe it had to do with siblings that you could just never live up to. What was that one moment for you that whispered in your ear again and again, this is all that you will ever be? Or perhaps the question came into laser focus for you when you graduated, or when you watched your last child move away, or when you hit that mid-career moment, or when you finally retired. And the reason it comes into laser focus at moments like that, at moments of transition, is because it turns out the question, what do I do next, often has a question behind it also. A question like this: who am I, and what place do I have in the world? We need to wrestle with this. We need to wrestle this question to the ground. And it's not just for philosophical reasons or for curiosity. it's actually for something really critical. And if you just take away two things from what we talk about today, one or two things, I want you to remember this. Maybe even write it down if you're a note taker today. If you don't know who you are, you will spend your life performing for people who weren't paying attention to you in the first place. You'll spend years answering to expectations that you were never meant to answer to. You'll carry names with you that shrink you. You'll chase jobs for approval or even do faith in a way that kind of keeps you hidden. Worst of all, you'll pass it down to your children or pass it down to people who look up to you. If you don't know who you are, they won't know who they are, and that will create a vacuum for any voice, anything to fill that space in their lives. So this is the question that I want to wrestle with you all today. It's this: how do we stop being defined by others and start becoming who we were meant to be? And to answer that question, we're gonna look at one of the wildest, most dysfunction-filled family events in all of the Bible. It's messy, it's raw, and right in the middle of it, God cuts through the chaos and he asks a question for them to sit with. What is your name? What is your name? But before we even turn to Genesis 32, I just want to take a minute with you and just set the table, set the scene a little bit. Jacob, our protagonist, our hero of the story, is coming back to the place that he was raised. He's been gone for 20 years and it's been 20 years since he's seen his parents, since he's seen his brother, who last time he saw had eyes set on killing him. Jacob is different now. Jacob has a big family. He's not that single young guy that he used to be. Jacob is wealthy. He worked really hard for that wealth, but also you get the sense that really God's provision is behind that wealth also. And in the scene that we're going to look at today, the writer tells us that Jacob is about ready to cross the ford of Jabbok. You can see the play on words, Jacob and Jabbok. It's probably meaningful to point to something meaningful. And if you don't know what a ford is, I didn't know what a ford is either. A ford is a low place in a river. The Jabbok was a tributary of the Jordan River. And it's a low place where it's low enough for animals and people to cross without needing any other means of transportation across the river. Now, when Jacob gets there, it's dark, or it's just about dark. He's taking all of his family. He's going to cross. He first sends his family and his servants, and he sends his animals. And Jacob is sitting there on the beach. He's the last one to go. And there he pauses in that moment, or he must have paused. That's kind of how I imagine it. And it's not just, I imagine it's not just the weight of possibly seeing everybody again, his parents, his brother. Certainly there was a weight. Jacob was known for some of his mistakes. Would his parents receive him? Would he feel abandoned? Would he be able to connect with him? He was so different. All of this must have been in the back of his mind as he's getting ready to cross. But as that sand kind of sunk in between his toes, as he prepared to cross over the river with the sun setting and everything slowly turning dark, there's something else that had to be preoccupying him that probably, at least for a moment, made him freeze. And it's this: Jacob was being hunted. Let's look at the text. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. And get this comes out of absolutely nowhere. A man wrestled with him till daybreak. Now, some of you might know how this story plays out, but chances are at this moment, this precise moment, Jacob doesn't know exactly what's going on. And it's really a key, crucial, pivotal part of his story. So what I want to do today is just zoom out and take a big picture of Jacob's entire life so we can get to know him a little bit better, so that when we come to this moment, we'll see why this was so important, why what's happening here is so critical. Jacob was born to Isaac, who was born to Abraham. Now, these were the great patriarchs of the Jewish faith. Abraham, God made a special covenant with Abraham, blessing him and promising him that he would make a great nation out of him, giving him many descendants, and that he would protect him, that he would be with him. And that passed down through Abraham to Abraham's only son through Sarah, and that was Isaac. Now, Isaac had 2 children. In fact, he had twins. So the promise was going to have to be passed down. And in that world, the most natural person for that to pass down through would have been through the firstborn, both the blessing and the inheritance. And most importantly, the covenant that God gave to Abraham would go through the firstborn. And that firstborn was Jacob's twin, who we know as Esau. Only that's not what happened. It passed through Jacob instead. So how did this happen? What all of a sudden flipped here? Before Jacob was born, God revealed to Rebekah, who was Isaac's wife, that the promise would go through Jacob instead. And that should have been a sign for Rebekah to trust. But instead of waiting for the right time, for how it would all shake out, Rebekah took things into her own hands. Isaac was old and blind. Rebekah dressed Jacob to look like Esau, and she coached him how to deceive her husband, his father, into receiving the blessing as Esau under disguise. This blessing that would have been a covenantal inheritance promised to the firstborn. And it worked. It worked, but it came at a cost. Now, in our modern ears, something like this, it might sound fixable. All right, Isaac, we made a mistake. You were duped. You were deceived. But in that word, when you said a blessing, it wasn't like just saying a wish. It was like making a pronouncement, a transaction. It was performative, and it was something that was really binding. So yes, Jacob deceived, and that's not good. But before we pile all the blame on Jacob, let's look at the bigger picture. Jacob had already taken Esau's birthright, not the blessing, but the birthright. They kind of come together for both the promise of what's to come and the promise for the inheritance. Jacob had already taken that from Esau in exchange for some soup. He duped his brother for a nice bowl of soup. And yeah, that looks bad on Jacob, but that also looks really bad on Esau, because Esau showed how much he really valued the birthright to begin with. Esau is to blame. Isaac, too. Isaac favored Esau. He favored Esau regardless of his firstborn status. And he favored Esau not because of his character, but because his son Esau knew how to bring him home some of the best choice meats. That's not so great. We know about Rebekah, who manipulated and coached her son to deceive her husband. And Isaac himself was no stranger to deception. He once lied to a foreign king about Rebekah being his sister because he was afraid. Dysfunction ran deep in the soil of this family. It's all over. Everyone was vying. Everyone was deceiving. Everyone was trying to secure their place, their identity, their name by whatever means necessary. It would make a great soap opera today. Not that soap operas are great, or that I watch them. And the seeds of struggle were planted very early, because one of the first times we get to know Jacob and Esau, it says that they were struggling together in Rebekah's womb. They struggled together inside of her. Now let's take one more step back, because perhaps it's really easy to assign blame in a situation like this. But when it feels like it's all up to you, don't you start looking for shortcuts in life too? And maybe it's something small or innocent, like a life hack, something to make your life easier. Our lives are busy, so finding a shortcut for laundry, for your inbox, for meal planning, all those things, they make sense. And when you find those, they're big wins. But when the pressure really starts to rise, when we're looking for approval, when we just have to have that spot, or when we feel like we have to do something or be something to matter, suddenly those shortcuts, they can just start to innocently or not so innocently slide into gray. Maybe you exaggerated something to win somebody's respect. Or you hide a part of yourself to stay in another person's good graces. Or you hustle harder, not because it's wise to hustle harder, but because you are so terrified of falling behind. Don't we all try to find some ways of trying to secure the blessing, not to grab hold of identity by whatever means necessary? Here's the problem with that, a ruse that can't last forever. Jacob didn't leave for 20 years to find himself. Esau planned on killing him. Now he's back at the ford of Jabbok, and he's looking across and expecting to encounter his brother again. And a report had just come to him that his brother is coming with 400 men. That's an army that he can't match. He doesn't have the numbers. Jacob is out of options, so here's what he does. He decides to split his family into two groups, so just in case one part of his family is attacked, the other part can flee. And he decides to send his brother a massive gift of over 500 animals as a way to offer peace. But there's no trickery here. Jacob has been tricking people his entire life, and now Jacob is out of options. And just as he prepares to take that first step into the river, across the river, near to his homeland, just as he's doing that, someone attacked. Now, as Paul Harvey used to say, many of you know the rest of the story here, but at this moment in time, chances are Jacob didn't know exactly what was happening to him. And even the original readers of this may not have known what was happening to Jacob, because they're probably thinking back. When was the first time that Jacob ever got in an altercation with anybody? Well, the first time he got into a physical altercation, and the only other time was with his brother Esau in the womb. He wrestled Esau in the womb. And the last time somebody was almost blind and couldn't see or really understand who they were encountering, who was that? That was Isaac, when Jacob deceived him. And now Jacob is in those shoes. It's dark. He can't see the person. He only identifies and knows this person who has attacked him and who is wrestling him. He only knows him as a man. So there's a good chance we're led to think that the man here, at least Jacob thinks at this moment, is Esau. Who else would it be? This explains why Jacob demanded a blessing from Esau. I won't let you go until I get the blessing. We haven't read that yet, but that's what Jacob is going to say in this wrestling match. Jacob had come to believe that the only way to be blessed was to wrestle that blessing from people. The only way for him to be blessed and take the blessing from his father that he felt like he deserved was to deceive his father. In the chapters in between these two events, he does the same thing to his father-in-law. The only way for me to get the blessing from my father-in-law is to deceive him and to trick him and to trip him up. And now, the only way that I'm going to be blessed, the blessing of peace that I need for my brother to survive, is to fight the human right in front of me, to fight him, to go after him. But here's the problem. Esau was not there. Let's read. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Did you know that there are actually companies out there? There are entire businesses that help people disappear. In Japan, they have a name for it. Yonige ya. Does anybody speak Japanese here? Good. It means fly-by-night shops. Fly-by-night shops. For a few $1,000s, they will just whisk you away. They'll change your phone. They'll bury your digital footprint. They'll resettle you 2 towns away. People use this service. They use it to free themselves from crushing debt, abusive relationships, career shame, or simply the feeling that they can't outrun the name that is constantly chasing them. This is kind of an extreme version of what many of us have fantasized about. If I could just reset where nobody knows my past. Or maybe something like, if I could start fresh without that nickname, that reputation trailing me wherever I go. We may not call it Yonige Ya, but we do the next best thing. We rearrange our social feeds. We curate the parts of us that we want to present before other people. We distance ourselves from people who know our worst chapter, the worst parts of our lives. We do anything to dodge the names that stick with us. Well, I need some volunteers. Today, it's, of course, All Together Sunday, so I'd love some kids. I need 3 kids. Raise your hand if you're willing to come up and help. I got one right there. Come on. All right. I got a special job for you. I want you to hold something. You can come up on stage. Let's have 2 of you over here and 1 right there. Perfect. Come on up. All right. For now, I just want you to hold something, okay? I have these little cards, and I just want you to hold them straight like this. There's a word underneath. See, when you kind of open it up, there's going to be a word stapled together like that, okay? But we don't want to show people yet, okay? All right, we got some great helpers. So you hold yours just like that and make it face forward. Perfect. All right. We doing good? Hey, give them a round of applause. They know what they're doing. What's underneath these before they flip them is a word, a name, a label. It's not just any word. These are words that chances are some of you have wrestled with at different times in your life. Words that aren't just names, but sometimes words that feel like or may have felt like for you have at one point in your life defined you. Each one also represents something that people may carry in a certain way, a burden, something that's weighty. So let's try our first one. It might be a little tough because I stapled the tops, but do you think we can just lift it up like that? All right, that's good. All right, everybody see that? Weird. Maybe you don't quite fit the mold, or you're different than people. Maybe your voice is different than people, or you dress a little bit different than people. You kind of stand out. And maybe because of that, people don't treat you the same. Maybe they've even called you weird, and you hide because of that. Let's look at our second name. Can you pull that up? Let's see what we got. They're nice and, stubborn. Stubborn. Now, stubborn isn't always a good thing to be, but you know what? You have opinions. And you don't give in. You push back. Sometimes that causes trouble, but people maybe have said that about you, and it's just kind of stuck. And it's a story that you keep living out. Ready for our last one? What do we got? Invisible. Invisible. Maybe you don't feel seen. You don't get noticed. Maybe you're the kind of person that people don't talk to when there's just like a coffee moment, or they talk past, but they never talk to. You kind of just feel unseen. How are you doing holding those up? Can you still hold those up for a little bit? You're doing great. Names like these, they have power. Some of them are entirely not true. Some of them have some truth. It's not the truth or the untruth of them that makes them stick. The power comes because they become identity markers in our lives. We start to believe them, so we start to live those out. And it turns out that Jacob had a name like this too. Now, scholars think that the name Jacob means something like protector. And parents in the ancient world, they liked to name their children generally. You see some exceptions in the Bible, but generally after something positive. Jacob, protector, that's a good solid name. But when Jacob first came out, he came right on the heel of his twin brother Esau. And the word for Jacob also sounds a lot like the word for heel. So that also kind of stuck with Jacob. And that's not really bad, that's just an observation, and it kind of was made into a thing. But then something happened later. The first time that Jacob took the birthright from his older brother, Esau was not happy about it. And Esau said something like this: "They did right when they named you heel, because you are always tripping people up." You're always tricking people. You're always deceiving people. But you see the metaphor, tripping people up by their heel. Now Esau's words, they weren't kind. They weren't controlled. It wasn't really a way of reconciliation between the brothers. And although it was reasonable to feel that way in that moment, it did bring damage. But here's the thing about Esau's words. They were not untrue. They were not totally false. Because Jacob did deceive, and he became a deceiver. But you know what Jacob would do in response to all of that? He wouldn't try to prove his older brother wrong. I'm not a deceiver. He would live out his story. He would live out the story that his brother gave him, tricking and tripping people up again and again and again, until one day God gave him a new name. It turns out that that's something that God likes to do, and not just for people like Jacob. Okay, you can close those, but keep them facing forward, okay? Sometimes what he does, and we're going to start over here, let's just turn that around like that. Sometimes he corrects. What was weird, it's not weird. It's wonderfully made. It has a unique fingerprint. I have created you beautifully with a purpose to be unique and to express yourself in your own way. You are a reflection of God's creativity. So sometimes he corrects. Sometimes, let's turn the second one over, flip it like that. Sometimes he repurposes something. Yeah, it's not always great to be stubborn. We want to be flexible. We want to be learners. We want to be humble. But you know what? Being steadfast, that's a good thing. Being somebody who doesn't just quit. being somebody who is faithful to God and stays on the true path. So sometimes God repurposes. And then lastly, other times, God, he redirects. He redirects. You might feel invisible, but you are chosen. You are handpicked. You are loved. You are called by God. These, my friends, aren't, let me make a clarification. These aren't the power of positive thinking, as helpful as that can sometimes be. Because sometimes we need to be confronted by negative truths. Jacob was a tripper-upper. He was a tripper-upper. But this is why positive reframing isn't simply enough. We need more. We need someone close to us to tell us who we are and who we are meant to be. Ladies, you did a wonderful job. Why don't you give them a round of applause? You can have a seat. You go back to your seats. When God called Jacob Israel, this is exactly what he was doing. All his life, he felt like he had to wrestle to get ahead. He felt like I have to trick everybody because nobody's going to show me any favors. But in the midst of that, God promised that his blessing would come to Jacob even before he was born, despite anything that he ever would do. No deceit added to his fortune. Nothing he did ensured that the blessing would come. It was already going to come in the first place. God's invitation is not to draw our identity or our resources from people. His invitation is to draw our resources and our identity from him. And because of that, a whole nation came from Jacob. This is how the passage closes. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites, they don't eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob says, "Please tell me your name." But the man responds and says, "Why?" And he says, "Why?" Because Jacob already knows his name. He already knows who it was. Jacob had contended with God and overcame. But he only overcame because God let him overcome in that moment, and he proved it, and he gave him an eternal reminder of it by striking him in the hip and leaving him walking with a limp for the rest of his life, to remember that moment forever and ever and ever. This is the end of the passage, but it is not the end of the story. What happens next is Jacob encounters Esau, after all. And Esau rejects Jacob's gift, not because it wasn't good enough, but because Esau had already accepted Jacob. And that, my friends, is something that only God could have done. And that was the whole point to begin with. That, my friends, is the moment that Jacob finally stopped living on second-hand names. He wasn't stealing a blessing. He wasn't outrunning a label. He wasn't curating a news feed. He was hearing, receiving, and owning something from God. That's what changed Jacob. That's what can change us. The path to purposeful, liberating identity is hearing from God who we are in Him. Who we are in Him. And that truth isn't just for Bible characters, it's for me, and it's for you. It's for you too. A few weeks ago, I got back from my trip. I looked at my desk. I looked at my emails. I looked at my projects. I was just like overwhelmed. I was frozen for a minute. I'm like, where do I even start? Like, what do I even do to this? Do I just take my computer and throw it in the trash? Is that the easiest thing to do? So I'm just staring there for a minute. And this doesn't often happen to me, but I just felt in my spirit, God whisper something to me. And he said, John, not Henry. I know some of you are thinking about using that name later. John, this is what I made you for, to bring order to the chaos. And that was enough. That was enough to pick it up and to keep going. What about you? When an old nickname surfaces, do you reach for a mask or do you lean into God's word for you? When a comparison game shouts, you're not enough, you're not good enough, do you scramble harder or do you listen to the one who calls you beloved? What would shift this week if instead of listening to 1,000 opinions, you turned to the Father and you asked him, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Now imagine a church where we all walked in freedom. What if Sunday mornings were naming Sundays for all of us? Imagine a teen or a young adult, maybe who's spent some time here or grown up in the church and has always been known as that little girl or such and such as boy, feeling invisible because they aren't really understood for who they are on their own terms. Imagine a young adult or teen like that here at Christ Church, all of a sudden making a decision to, instead of hiding, which might be normal, to converse, have a conversation with an adult, knowing in their heart that they are sent and seen. Sent and seen. Or imagine a single mom coming in here feeling like, I am not enough. That's her label. I am not enough. And taking that label and instead casting it aside for a new label that says, enough strength for the day through the Holy Spirit who loves me. Can you see a man coming into this church who might be haunted by failure and failure and failure, being met at the door by somebody who's already said the prayer silently to themselves over that person, saying the prayer and the word restored. Restored. That's a culture that Jacob's descendants were meant to carry, and that's a culture that Jesus died to give us. So this week, I just want to invite you all to practice two simple things. Number one, listen. Listen. Maybe take 10 minutes each day and listen. Father, remind me who I am. Say that and listen. Number two, name. See the image of God in people and call that out. Be the voice of God for somebody who really needs it. If we live that, Southern New Hampshire won't just know us for our programs, they will know our God. And someday someone will look back at that moment like Jacob did at Peniel, and they'll say, that's where I met God face to face, and I limped away free. Let's pray.